Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the #1 source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
Max, you were so close to this being such a tough episode for you to jump back in for good in the room, because oh man, if there was another loss like the Rangers loss, it was gonna be into the fire for you.
I thought you were about to say because I was going to record it on the heels of that Lions game, which worked out okay, but
we don't have to talk about the fact that the Red Wings are last in the Atlantic right now and the Lions lead the NFC North. So we're just going to celebrate the fact that the Lions lead the NFC North. That's all we're going to take away. It's too early in the season in the NHL to get too wrapped up in where NHL teams are sitting and where the Red Wings are. But it's the right point in the NFL season to celebrate the fact that Detroit's up top their division. Don't ask me why. It's just the rules.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Folks, this is a good in the room edition of the Winged Wheel Podcast, which means Max Bultman is here, not just for a guest spot, not just for an interview, but for the entire episode. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, the occasional Detroit Lions brag, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
I'm Max.
And I'm Evan.
We're
getting better at that, you know?
And you two coordinated really well there, because I thought I was looking for Evan to go next, so that's good.
No, Evan made it clear. He's the closer. I got to defer that to him.
That's right.
I'm like the John Rocker of podcasting.
As you've seen, Max, from our pre-show, Evan is really the one who pulls all the strings here. So as he says, it goes. On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be talking to you about the two Red Wings games that have happened. A tale of two tapes, vastly, vastly, vastly different. A rough loss to the New York Rangers as Detroit loses that little mini 2-game series, and then a big, exciting bounce-back win against the Nashville Predators, which was much needed and came also on the entire storyline of Marco Kasper being recalled. So we're going to be talking about those games, the takeaways, big moments, bad moments, Lions save, how Kasper did his first point of the season in his season debut. And then we are going to get into what this roster looks like now that Kasper's in here, what's in store for him for the short and long-term future. Is he going to stay in Detroit? We have notes on other Red Wings, some fun stats, some not so fun stats. Sebastian Cossa down in Grand Rapids before we jump into some NHL news and lots more before overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to some really great benefits like our Patreon exclusive Discord, as well as automatically being entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. Also, you get access to all of our bonus content, including our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. We let loose, have fun, answer any questions that didn't make the main show, the whole shindig, and Max is going to be on it for this one as well, because it is the Good in the Room remote episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. So again, we're remote. We're going to sound a little bit different. We're not in studio. Well worth it, though, to have Max on the show. Let's jump into it. The Red Wings played Thursday against the New York Rangers, and they lost by the same margin, 3 goals. The previous game was a 4-1 road loss, but this one was a 5-2 home loss. And this one felt, correct me if I'm wrong or if you guys disagree, worse. Yeah?
This was one of those games that felt catastrophic if it wasn't the 4th game of the season, because top to bottom, nothing looked good on the team that game. Goaltending, shaky, defense, a travesty, forwards, disinterested, not able to generate much. It was a good test in patience for all Red Wings fans, because, yeah, obviously you're watching the game, you're angry, alarm bells are going off, you're pointing to a million problems, and then just that little voice in the back of your head, it's only game 4, it's only game 4, it's only game 4.
Yeah, and the difference in the 2 games against the Rangers, I would say, is in the first loss in New York, A, you're on the road, you know that that's automatically an uphill battle, and B, you were facing Igor Shesterkin, and not just facing him, but seeing in very clear detail why he is the best goalie in the league right now. He was outstanding in that game. There was a real case coming out of that to say that the Red Wings had gotten goalied, at least for a large chunk of that game. I don't know that they were wire to wire great, but certainly that second period, they were awesome, and Shesterkin was just a wall. The game in Detroit did not look like that. I didn't think the Red Wings got nearly enough, certainly at even strength, pressure that they would have wanted to get on Jonathan Quick, on the Rangers in general. And Quick was good, but they didn't make him be great. And the special teams, I think, is the story of the game. You know, that the Rangers power play starts 3 for 3 and the game felt over at that point. But one of the reasons it felt over is because Detroit just wasn't generating nearly enough, really at any strength, but particularly at 5-on-5.
So again, it was a 5-2 final. The first period featured 2 goals, both from Artemi Panarin, one on the power play. And in the second period was actually a little bit of a flash of positivity, some hope, as Moritz Seider scored his first goal this season from Compher and Raymond on a nice play. But after that, the Rangers just kind of ran away with it. In the third period, there was a kind of empty, vapid feeling goal where J.T. Compher on the power play made it 5-2 from Sherratt and Gustafsson. But again, that was all she wrote. And this kicked off a frenzy. We'll get into the call-up that happened, but this was the first time, you know, in my thinking that I broke through that it's early in the season. There is some kind of cause for concern here, or at the very least, like, this is not something that should just be explained away by rust. Even if it is rust, even if it is, you know, the guys are still figuring it out, or this is a different look team, you still don't want to see this, because to me, that game was indicative of unpreparedness for the Red Wings in my mind. To a degree, I thought through that many games, you're not going to be perfect. It would be insane to expect the Red Wings to be perfect, but I did feel like this team is potentially coming to a big cliff here of they're unprepared, and it's setting them on the back foot for the start of this season. So obviously the next game changed that context for a lot of the fan base, but people were extremely riled up, and I think for good reason.
Yeah, we talked about it after the Pittsburgh game and obviously theorized it in the offseason, but then Max even had an article after the Rangers game summarizing it well, in the sense that it wasn't that they weren't prepared, and it wasn't just that they looked bad. It's that once again, it was in all the most predictable ways. Turnovers, defense unable to move the puck forward, blown assignments in the D zone, unable to generate steady offensive pressure, shaky goaltending in big situations. Again, individually, none of these things in a single game, especially game 4 of the season, is going to throw alarm bells. But the fact that the flashing warning lights were there for so long and have already appeared in games this year, and then to just see it highlighted, mind you, it is the New York Rangers, a great team in the league, but still so obviously, I think that's the reason all the alarm bells started, you know, firing, because then the online discourse became, is this the roster? Is this coaching? What is this? And when it's that predictable, the answer has got to be both to some degree. But I pin the predictable problems more on the roster, and I pin the, I'll call it lack of response, like the Red Wings just being disinterested once they got behind, on coaching. We're going to see more games like this year, though. That's the problem, because again, it was so predictable.
Yeah, I would say that I'm kind of two minds, and was trying to keep both of them, you know, front of mind when writing after that game. Because on one hand, it's 4 games into the season. It's 3 3-goal losses in the first 4 games, which is bad. But I do try to remember that, like, part of it is, if there were a 4-game stretch with 3 3-goal losses in February, it would be, you know, people would be upset, but not to the same degree, because you'd have already seen them be good. And so you would know that there was more in there and that this was an aberration, right? Which in all likelihood, it will be, not like a total aberration, but like it's not going to be the story for the whole season like that, right? It never is in the NHL. So I tried to keep that on one hand. On the other hand, like Brad said, like one reason that kind of flies a little bit, not out the window, but off to the side, is that all the problems that everyone was worried about for this team and could see coming from a mile away have already haunted them. And they were in their first 4 games, they had 2 mid-game goalie changes, right? I know that the goaltending is kind of an easy scapegoat sometimes, but everyone for months has been saying, like, is there really any certainty here? Is there any clear hierarchy? Who's the guy? Maybe there's not going to be a guy is probably where I landed, and it's just going to be a rotation. That's a hard way to live, especially when you have this defense that can be kind of chaotic. And I do think that Rangers game was defined by the special teams. Like, obviously the numbers will be very clear to you on that. The Red Wings missed some big chances and the Rangers capitalized on virtually every single chance. But I just don't think that you can stop the blame there, especially when you had, team leaders after the game coming to the podium and calling out the team defense, saying everything starts with the defensive zone. It's some of the forwards want to just play offense and are built for that and need to buy in. Like, that's not stuff you want to hear after 4 games. And that is where I think the alarm bells were loudest.
Another thing to remember is we talk about, every point matters, and every point literally did matter last season for the Red Wings. One more point, one less mistake from a goalie, a defenseman, some kind of breakdown, and they're in the playoffs last year. That's still in their heads. That's what this team is fighting with this year. And you have to think that every time they feel like they might not be the same competitive version of the Red Wings last year, that makes last year's miss of the playoffs by a tiebreaker hurt that much more. So over the course of a season, will 4 or 5 games dictate, how your team goes? No, Max is exactly right. That's never the story in the NHL. It's why we always try to offer long-term context, even if we're focusing in on just a few games for each episode. But at the same time, the mentality, the perspective in the room, not letting things snowball, especially at the start of the season, that has a mental effect and has an emotional effect on this team. Hockey is an incredibly human sport. Locker rooms, we talk about glue guys and good in the room is funny, and I wish I had the advanced planning and so I could have made a funnier bit with that. But genuinely, that kind of locker room chemistry and the mentality and the kind of thing that David Perron brought to the locker room that's no longer there, that stuff matters. And so you have to make sure that even though you can mathematically come back from this, you don't let these things, these molehills become mountains. So yeah, I think you guys nailed it. I think there's a measured amount of concern here that's respectable and justifiable. And I think what we saw the Red Wings do next was part of the response. Now, there were injuries to the team because they did recall Marco Kasper under emergency conditions, and that had something to do with the injury to Fisher and then Mott, and I think there's a bug going around the room as well. So that's the technical reason why, but I do also think that calling out Marco Kasper was because this team needed a jolt. What do you guys make of it?
Yeah, and if they looked a little flat, if they looked like they weren't, hard enough on the forecheck, if they, all these things, well, Marco Kasper is an antidote to all of that. He brings that young energy into your lineup. He's got some of those harder elements that he can bring. I don't think it's a coincidence that he gets an assist on I think it was in the first period of the call up there, and in a very Marco Kasper kind of way, in puck support and get into a puck that, a battle that his teammate had been in, but not quite totally won, gets it back to him and sets up the play. Like, there's a lot of those elements that Marco Kasper brings. And I think a lot of that, like you said, that the Mott play, I think is he crashed into a Rangers player, kind of caught him on like the hip to Mott's head or face. And, who knows what that injury is, but you had a need, and this time they didn't. I guess the point is they didn't go with this like short term, let's just get a veteran body, Austin Watson, up here. They went, let's get the guy who everyone with 2 eyes knew deserved to be the first call up, if not already on the team by now. And I think he was a direct response.
Yeah, and I love that mentality of the team because, the bottom 6 of this team is not good enough to feel super secure in their jobs. And I'm not saying trade them, waive them, whatever, but there is a thing in locker rooms where guys can get too comfortable, especially when you have a game like the Ranger game where the fight just wasn't there. The pushback when things were going south just wasn't there. Even the national media was talking about it. I've seen a piece from Friedman saying he was watching the game and was stunned at how little the Red Wings resisted. And a guy like Marco Kasper, who, like Max said, isn't just a short-term solution, and Austin Watson, another one of the same flavor of forward, comes in and goes, hey, he's trying to take one of your jobs, and he's going to. Who's it going to be? and then everybody wakes up. It gives everybody a jolt. And then obviously Kasper himself brings some energy and a jolt. And, you know, I wouldn't call the Nashville game there a masterpiece, but it was significantly better than the previous game.
Let's go over that Nashville Predators game. It started out with Nashville going up 1-0, and then for a moment it looked like 2-0 as well. So it was, I think you tweeted, Max, like another early hole for the Red Wings, and that was going to be a problem. Thankfully, it ended up being 1-1 rather than 2-0 as the Red Wings added that goal. Tarasenko, primary assist, Berggren, his first point of the season, and then, like you said, Marco Kasper with the secondary assist. And like, does it really matter on the road for the first goal for Kasper to have been involved? Not necessarily, but at the same time, it is kind of a nice thing for the team to have him involved right away. And like you said, Max, the way he's factored into that goal, it was just prototypical Marco Kasper. That's what he's going to bring to this team. You know, he's a bulldog. He is that. It's not a bad thing, but people think, oh, 200-foot player, there's nothing to it. But no, he is a 200-foot player that you hate to play against. Pinball isn't the right way to say it because it makes him seem small or meek. Like, he will crash headlong into you in the corners. He'll win puck battles. He'll get into the dirty areas. And I think he has a little bit more offense and skill and flair than people give him credit for, too. So that's what he brought in. And in the second period, Dylan Larkin goes up and picks up a rebound off of a DeBrincat shot, off a nice feed from Kane on the power play. Detroit's up 2-1. Stamkos ties it in the third. Andrew Copp, man. Rocket Richard without, what was the joke you made, Brad, before we were recording?
He might win the Rocket Richard without actually shooting a puck past a goalie.
We're here for it. It's the Abdelkader Datsuk era 2.0. The Red Wings took the lead there 3-2. Simon Edvinsson sealed it with the empty netter, and then Andrew Copp with another empty netter. So what was a 3-2 game ended up as 5-2 with the double empty netters, and the Red Wings ended up winning. Something I skipped past there, one of the biggest moments of the game was Alex Lyon late on a 5-on-3 in the second period as it was wrapping up, makes what will go down as one of the saves of the season with the knob of his stick, was it? Off of Stamkos. It was as close as you can get to making that save in one of the hardest ways a goalie can make it, and absolutely saved the game for the Red Wings.
Yeah, they need saves like that, and this game was probably a good illustration of, if someone asked you, what's the formula for the Red Wings to win some games and make the playoffs? This is probably the type of game that it has to look like. You get a solid performance out of Alex Lyon. Not like an Igor Shesterkin level of game, but good enough to give you a chance to win, which obviously he did because they won. You get the power play clicking. Obviously, that Kane to DeBrincat to Larkin goal was beautiful, and they're going to have to lean on the power play very heavily again this year, like they did last year. Kasper providing, like we already mentioned, so I won't repeat it, but like that boost, and obviously led to the first goal. Gives him a bit more depth. And then the depth of the team in another place, just chipping in a fluky goal. They don't have to be pretty. They go in. If Andrew Copp scores 37 goals this year and none of them touch his stick, that's A-okay. And then you just kind of hold on. The bend, don't break defense to go with all of it. This is the most likely scenario, game in, game out, of how the Red Wings can string together a bunch of wins.
And that's why that save by Alex Lyon at the end of the second period was so huge, because if the Red Wings give up a late one there and go into the third tied 2-2, who knows what you're going to get from that team coming out of the intermission. Like, they could have very well folded there, but that save probably led significantly to the Red Wings winning.
And as we mentioned near the top of the show, it stymied a lot of very quick snowballing discourse, and I don't mean just on Twitter or whatever Facebook group you're looking at, like real discourse. We were laughing about how quickly that picked up steam across national media, across folks who don't really pay attention to the Wings too much, and if they're talking about them a lot, it means something is notable. And I thought that was a hugely important win, again in the context that I offered earlier, which is the start of the season. You can't let things get away from you. If the Red Wings lost this game, I will tell you, the pre-episode conversation that we have would be a lot more. This would have been a much different toned episode. And I will say, like, one loss doesn't end your season, but one win doesn't fix everything too. I think the Red Wings need to continue to find performances like this more often than they had against the Rangers. And part of that, again, could be the quality of the competition, but this was a massive, massive, massive win.
The only thing I'd say, though, is like you have 2 wins against an 0-5 team that I don't think any of us think should be 0-5, right? But you needed like 35 plus save efforts from your goaltender in both games to do it. And I still think that there is a level of concern there. I don't know if you want to say it's just on the defensive side of the puck. I think a lot of the issues with this team, and have since last year, stem from the fact that, and it's something that Ben Sherratt pointed to after the game, is that their lineup is almost kind of split. It's like the top half of the lineup is a bunch of like small skill guys who want to play with the puck. And if they have the puck, that's great. You're in a good spot because they're really good players. And the bottom 6 is almost entirely like checkers. Not completely, but in large part checkers. And if they do their job and win the matchup, they're pretty much keeping it level. And I think that's a really hard way to try to win games that way if you trail. Like if you trail with that kind of construction, you're in a hole for a lot of the game. And so I think that the way that they've won these games is like, you take the wins. I think certainly the first win over Nashville, the shutout, like they get 42 shots, but not that much quality. You can live with it. I do think that they got to find a way to, I don't know if it's find a set of combinations that work better, if it's just about personnel, but that I think is like the concerning thing, is that yes, you're 2-3. You'd rather be better, but you're probably pretty happy to be 2-3 with how you've played through these first 5 games. And yet, you can also feel a little bit like you've dodged a big bullet in being 2-3.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad you brought up the part about the forwards, because I know we got, raked over the coals all summer every time we mentioned the fact that, hey, the Red Wings forwards aren't as good as everybody thinks they are. Yeah, they finished 9th in goals last year. That's great, but there's very obvious problems there. And I think it's a personnel issue, again, because the issues are predictable, right? Everybody saw that split in the lineup. You're looking at Tarasenko and Kane going, okay, well, that could not be more of a different player than the 2 wingers below them, Rasmussen and Fisher, for example. You're going to have to play 2 completely different styles of hockey. And as talented as Kane and Tarasenko are, those are not guys who are going to be dominating 5-on-5 this year, which is why the Red Wings need to lean so heavily on the power play, because by and large, this team has 2 problems that lead to the problems you were just referencing. And this is defense and forwards included, outside of the top line, obviously, is they're not fast and they don't move the puck particularly well. Even a guy like Kane, who's a wizard with the puck, he's not quick anymore. So he's only going to be so effective at 5-on-5 either end of the ice, especially in transition or D zone. Same with Tarasenko. The skill they bring, and once you get that offensive zone blue line, they're going to be great and they're going to do a lot of great things. But getting that blue line's a far bigger task than a lot of people would like to admit. And when you have big, slow D who struggle to move the puck, and then you look up and you have this core of bottom 6, 200-foot players who struggle to maintain offensive zone time, and then you get this second line of very skilled players, but who are going to struggle defensively, fairly or unfairly, that is going to put a lot of pressure on the D zone coverage and the goaltending. So sometimes you will have a game like the Ranger game where it all goes wrong and everything falls apart. But like I was talking about with the formula earlier, the reason the Wings were 1 point out of the playoffs last year was because they were trend breakers. They were overshooting expectation. The power play was good, et cetera, et cetera. They have to do that again this year. And the whole argument is not sustainable, because we've seen not both extreme ends of it this year, but we've seen both sides of it. And it's not a comfortable way to live. So yeah, it worked in their favor in this Nashville game because Alex Lyon was very good. And again, the defense was bend, don't break. They gave up a lot of chances, but they weren't A+ chances over and over again. And they eked out a win.
And I'll say, I think that Rask Fisher line can maintain zone time, but it's in a very specific way. It's heavy cycle, and it doesn't tend to actually lead to like these. Sometimes it can, like you can cycle a team to a point where they lose coverage and you get a look in the slot. But a lot of that is just you're playing on the cycle to wear the other team down, to keep it in that zone. It doesn't often turn into like shots and grade A's.
And there is value to that because if those three guys are out against Sidney Crosby, that's a minute that Sidney Crosby's not in your zone. So there's absolutely value to that. But again, it's a law of majorities. Is that most of their shifts? Some games, yes. Some games, no.
And I think that's why Marco Kasper is such a logical addition to this lineup. Like, he can be injected into the bottom six while playing up in the top six, but he provides skill that, and no offense to the guys who play in the bottom six, that they just don't have, right? So it provides the opportunity for those lines to actually generate some offensive 5-on-5 rather than just being minute munchers.
And I think, so one of my bold predictions in that article that I had for this year was that Kasper would finish the year in the top six. And what Evan just said is a big reason why, right? And it's October 20 as we record this. I'm not calling for this, in the next game, but I wouldn't mind seeing it at some point soon here, because I think if you went Kasper, Compher, Kane as the second line, I think it addresses what Brad talked about with Kane and the feet, and Kasper certainly has the feet. He's got the energy. He can go win a ton of pucks for Patrick Kane. And what do we know about Patrick Kane is that wherever you are, he's going to find you, and he's usually going to figure out the right situation to get you that puck. His assist in the other game, Mickey pointed this out in the telecast. It's a great look, right? Like, so DeBrincat's at the back door. He doesn't really have a lane to him, but Larkin cuts across the front of the net and pulls the defenders with him just enough that there creates a seam. Kane sees that seam. He finds DeBrincat. DeBrincat puts a shot. I think he gets his own rebound and sends it to Larkin. And you have your goal there. DeBrincat's the primary assist, but the whole play is made by that Kane feed off of Larkin clearing out the slot. And what's my point here is that if you put Kane on the perimeter where he can work, and then you have two guys in Compher and Kasper who can skate, who can retrieve, who can go be around the net, I'm pretty sure Patrick Kane's going to find him in a good spot to shoot the puck.
So let's get right into how Marco Kasper did. He came in and the whole lineup got shaken up, really. Tarasenko, Larkin, Raymond was the first line that they started with, and listed DeBrincat, Compher, Kane. Rasmussen, Kasper, Berggren was the third line. That was Kasper's line, and that's how they started the game, with Veleno, Copp, and Fischer on the fourth line. On D, they had Edvinsson, Seider, Sherratt, Petrie, Mata, Gustafsson, Lyon, obviously taking the start over Talbot. And I'm talking about the lineup for something we're going to mention here in a second, which is slotting. But how did Kasper do in your mind? How did his season debut go? I know we've talked about how he performed in that very Marco Kasper way on that goal, but overall, what did you see from Marco Kasper specifically in that one game debut?
A prototypical Marco Kasper game. Unspectacular, but effective. He definitely provided that piece, again, not to repeat it to death, that the bottom six was missing. And they paired him with Berggren, and again, with all due respect to the other guys in the bottom six, Berggren's a distributor who struggles to retrieve pucks and win board battles. Kasper's strength, he did that a bunch. But what Kasper has that the other guys Berggren's been playing with doesn't have is better offensive instinct. He can get himself in good positions to create chances, and if he's involved with it, he can finish them. There wasn't a lot of that this game in particular, but you could see the dynamic that they were going for, and you definitely saw flashes of it throughout the game with, okay, this is how this line's going to succeed. And again, it just provides a different look, a different flavor, a different element to what the Red Wings have been providing. And yeah, he got his assist. There was a couple moments where you noticed him. For the most part, he was unspectacular, but he didn't look out of place, and he wasn't a net negative player.
Yeah, I think it's the puck transporting that you're really glad to have from him too, is that he's a guy who can skate with the puck. He can gain the zone for you, like Brad alluded to earlier. And then you kick it out and you try to get to the net. And, I don't think he's going to dangle through a bunch of guys on a consistent basis this year. Although we did see it a couple times in the preseason, I have to say. But I don't think that that's the main way he's going to create offense. The main way he's going to create offense is north-south. And for some reason, that gets a bad rap in some circles. It is not a bad thing to be able to do that. It can be a hard way to live, but frankly, it's an even harder way to live to try to go through guys' skates every time you do it too. So I think the look that Kasper gave was very encouraging, probably exactly what you would have wanted to see from him. And again, the assist comes on a play that's very simple. It's puck support, and you just dump it right back down low, and you get your secondary on it. But there are going to be plays that he's going to make. And I think one thing he showed his teammates, I talked to one of the players toward the end of camp when it was not yet clear if Kasper was going to make it or not. And what the player said to me was like, a lot of times when young guys come up, you can kind of tell when there's like pressure, like that they don't hold on to the puck very well. He does. And that wasn't always the case for him. A year ago, I don't think that was the case for him. It's coming to him now, and that's a huge asset for him.
For him to come up and even have a game, one, that he gets on the score sheet, two, where we can look at him and say, yeah, that's Marco Kasper, and he has the confidence of a guy who's played, 3+ pro years in a way that Max just mentioned, with not being scared to have the puck or whatever. That's a big win. I saw an errant comment, as folks very rightly were upset about the Red Wings in the start to the season online, which is, Marco Kasper is not going to be a savior of this team any more than Simon Edvinsson is. So the shifting expectation that these kids are going to be saviors is incorrect. And I want to say, anyone who thinks that Simon Edvinsson or now Marco Kasper are going to save this team, that is not what we're talking about at all. The whole, here's what the Red Wings have as an issue in terms of their roster makeup or how prepared they are. That is a not completely, but mostly separate issue than Marco Kasper being on this team. So I think it's important not to apply the context of the entire season and the poor start that the Red Wings had to Marco Kasper. And so to that end, I think it was a good start to, this is going to be one of those things that we all obviously agree, what should be a full season of Marco Kasper, barring things going catastrophically wrong or, he really, really trails off. And that is a possibility with NHL rookies. There's not really a reason for him to not be in this lineup because of what he brings. And I think this first game was a good start.
Well, he had a really good debut, right? Like, how many times have we seen guys get called up and they play forward, they play 10 minutes, or a defenseman, they play, bottom pair, and they get really sheltered. Like, Marco Kasper had the second most shifts on the team and was top 5 in time on ice. So they put him right into the fire. I know Nashville obviously is having a catastrophic start to the season, but they should be a good team. They're good players on that team. Their defense play heavy. So that's a big test for him. And to play that much and get the confidence of the coach right away is a huge tell to me.
Yeah, they're the exact kind of team that should give a rookie fits to play against, right?
Exactly.
There's a lot of really good veterans on that team that should be able to get under his skin, should be able to frustrate him, should be able to intimidate him, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think every reasonable fan realizes Kasper and Edvinsson, they're not the saviors here, but the one thing that, especially for a team in the Red Wings position, because this could apply to every team, is incremental improvement. There's not one player in the league, short of maybe 5 guys in the league, where you drop them on the Red Wings today and all of a sudden they're a playoff lock. But Edvinsson, a young guy, comes in, replaces whoever from last year. You hope he's just a little bit better. You bring in a Marco Kasper, and whether he's replacing Mott, Fisher, one of the guys that's hurt, or another guy that comes out of the lineup, you hope he's just a little bit better. And you get enough of those throughout the season, all of a sudden you're a little frisky towards the playoffs, but then the Red Wings have the added benefit with this of going, okay, now we're getting a more NHL experience. Edvinsson's going to play a season. Kasper's going to play a season. You're looking down the future. It's more important that these guys get better as we go on, because they matter to when the Red Wings are going to need them. And again, it's incremental improvement towards the playoffs this year, and it's incremental improvement towards the Stanley Cup, hopefully in 5 years.
Yeah, I think waiting for a savior at all is like don't do that. Like that's not happening. That's not coming, and you shouldn't want it to. Like I guess if it was a real savior, that's fine. But like there's very few of those, to Brad's point. And even with those players, I think it's a little overstated the degree to which they can be a savior in that way, right? Like, you need everyone in your locker room pulling harder. Every single player. And that's my favorite kind of team to watch as a sports fan, is when it takes the entire team stepping up. You are not just dependent on, is Connor going to come bring us a goal tonight? Like, no, go get it. Go manufacture something. Shut it down so that you only need one goal. Like, all of those things I think make for really good hockey and a really good just overall team vibe. And would you love more superstar players? Every team in the league would. But I think that there is a benefit to be had from not having players of that caliber, and it's that it forces every player on the team to go and play like they might be the difference in the game. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah, and you have enough of these, we'll call them transitions in the lineup. All of a sudden, 2 years, you could look like a different team. You look at Florida did it more through trades and free agency than the draft, which is thing, but then they add a Carter Verhaeghe, they add a Sam Reinhart, they add and add and add, and all of a sudden over this 2, 3, 4 year period, they only replace 1 or 2 guys at a time, but it's a completely different lineup. But almost every line, every D pair is improved. This year you bring in a Kasper to replace, we'll say Tyler Mott for the sake of argument on this one, even though I know he'll be back in the lineup. You bring in Edvinsson to replace a Jake Wallman. Not great example, but I would hope in 2 years, Edvinsson is a big upgrade on Wallman. Next year, you bring in a Danielson to replace a Fisher. You bring in a Mazer to replace another guy in the bottom six. You bring in a Bouillon to replace a Mata. And if those guys are incremental improvements, but they're younger and they grow and they evolve, you're looking at a completely different lineup in a shorter period of time than you would think. Like, you get all these guys in the next 2-3 years. What's this team look like in 4 or 5 years when they're starting to hit their stride, hit their prime, and to Max's point, there's no savior there. Marco Kasper, Nate Danielson, Simon Edvinsson, they're not saving the Red Wings. But if all of those guys, plus Sandy and Pellikka, plus Cossa, are better than the guys they replaced, it's a completely different outlook.
That's what I like so much about the Rask, Copp, Fisher line, is I think it embodies that spirit, right? No single one of those guys seems like a guy that's supposed to carry the line. They all go out and they execute. They're hard on the forecheck. They get in on the cycle. If any single one of them has a breakaway, you're not like, this guy's going to score right now, right? But they might, and more likely than not, they are going to play the hard shift and they are going to end, the puck is going to end the ice or end the shift in a better place on the ice than it was when it started. That to me, like, embodies kind of this whole spirit. And it's why I've defended that line a lot and I will continue to, because I think that's why they call it the identity line. They're doing what they should be asking every player on the team to do, which is just make things a little bit better, make things a little bit more favorable, play a territorial game. If you can't get these super pretty 2-on-1s, so be it. Manufacture something, or at the very least, don't give something up. I think they're very good at that. And I think the more that the team buys into that mindset, the better off this team is going to be, even if they aren't playing that same style on their shift.
One last point on Kasper, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit already. I mentioned slotting in the lineup, which the general idea is, where are you playing your best players? Where are you playing guys in the lineup compared to their talent level? Is this something where Marco Kasper allows the Red Wings to put bottom six players in the bottom six, and that way you're not asking them to play harder minutes than they can handle or more minutes than they can handle? Or is that assigning too much credit to Marco Kasper early? Is there a kind of slotting benefit to Marco Kasper joining this team right now?
I think it's a huge benefit because, one, to something Max brought up in his predictions article, you hope he's playing in the top six by the end of the year, because again, then that creates a different dynamic in the bottom six. Where I like Kasper in this lineup in the short term, because I think in the short term, you can't really tinker with the top six. Just with the personnel they have, this is kind of how it has to be for the most part. You can swap those six around wherever you want, but it's going to be those six. You got the identity line. You want to call them the third line. You want to call them the fourth line. Doesn't matter. They are who they are. And again, whether that's Fisher, Copp, and Rasmussen specifically, you can plug Veleno in, you can plug Mott in. They do the same thing. Then you have Kasper and Berggren, who bring that depth scoring option, which was a huge concern. I love calling it the Thomas Vanek role because, Blashill used him so effectively in that third line. We're not putting him up against the other team's top D. We're going to give these guys sheltered offensive situations where they can thrive. But because Kasper is such a good 200-foot player and because Berggren's such a good distributor, you can put a Rasmussen, a Veleno, a Mott with those guys, and they will be able to play with them at either end of the ice because you've got Kasper who can play all over the ice. You got Berggren who can make things happen for these two guys in the offensive zone. I don't think it's a world beater line. I don't think that's an above average third line in the NHL, but compared to what Watson, Veleno, Mott would bring, this is, in my opinion, a much better depth line for what the Red Wings need.
The one thing I really like about Kasper is he brings just a lot of versatility to the lineup. Like, if you want this line to drive offense, okay, we'll put Vlad Tarasenko on that line, and we saw them score, and they were generating offense down low. You want this line to be, a third line sort of shutdown, but maybe provide some offense. Okay, you can put anyone else in the bottom six with them, and they can be that line. And if you need to move Kasper up, you can do that as well. So I like the ability they have to move him anywhere in the lineup. You can add somebody else in to provide an additional identity to this line. I really like Marco Kasper's versatility that he can bring even just after one game.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. I get Brad's point that, like, the top six seems like it should be set. Are we ready to say that it should be, though? Because, like, have they even found a combination with that top six that you like both lines at the same time so far? It kind of seems like right now you just kind of like whatever line Raymond's on, right?
You're right. There is no combination that I think I'm going to truly love that second line. But at the same time, whatever combination of those six I like better than throwing a Rasmussen, Copp, or Veleno up there right now. I would love to see Kasper in there, but I don't think you're doing that to the kid this early into his call up. Again, I hope he gets there. And then, yeah, you can shuffle with it a bit. But yeah, I think that second line is going to struggle no matter what. That's why having an effective third, fourth line that can bring offense is going to be so important to this team, because there are going to be, again, more games than we would like to admit where whatever iteration of this Red Wings second line is going to be very quiet at 5-on-5.
I'd be a little curious to see that. And this was never really like a full-time line in this game, but they did score that goal. I would be curious to see Kasper, Tarasenko, Berggren as the third line. And then you bump Copp onto the wing of that second line, which, like, in Copp's time in the Rangers, he was on the wing opposite like an all-world playmaker in Artemi Panarin. And I would be curious to see how that affected things, to have like a heavier presence, a defensively responsible presence, two of them with Copp and Compher. And Copp has some playmaking to him. I know people have their frustrations with him. He is a smart hockey player. He really is. And I would say that's probably his best asset, would be his hockey sense and his playmaking. I would be very curious to see him there, if not Kasper. I think Kasper would be a great option there too. And then let Kasper have that third line center job. And let's just see what Copp looks like on the wing there, and see if it changes up that dynamic a little bit. Add a little muscle into the top six.
I don't know if it's familiarity, but I thought Berggren looked really good with Kasper last night. I know they obviously spent time together in Grand Rapids, but there was something there, and I think it just sort of energized Berggren. I thought he had a great game when he was alongside Marco Kasper last night.
All right. We are going to talk more about the Red Wings. We're going to talk about the goalie situation, but first we want to hear from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast. Back after this. This episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for Detroit, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer, and it's great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode, or the one you see on your screen, to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Welcome back. This is a Good in the Room episode where Max is going to bring us, well, it's taking a shape. We're figuring it out as it goes, depending on what the news is. But Max, you had something really good that we were talking about over the course of the weekend. And before we get into the goalie discussion, go through this little statistical quiz you had for us, because I think it'll be fun for the listeners.
Yeah, so there right now are 7 players on the Red Wings who have a expected goal share above 50%. Expected goal share, for people who don't know, it's a very simple stat. It's the regular, like, expected goals percentage that you usually see. But if you just totaled up the number of expected goals that happen when someone's on the ice, you want the highest percentage possible to be in your favor. Expected goals for, right? If you're above 50%, that's considered good. Obviously slightly below is not like a huge red flag, but you want to be above 50% if you can. It's early in the season still, but 5 games in, I think, is a relevant enough sample to talk about this. There's 7 Red Wings who are on the positive side of 50 right now, and I'm curious how many of them you guys can name.
Well, I saw the group chat, so I think where this is going to get fun is we have to get Evan to guess.
Okay, fair enough. Evan, I want your best guesses here.
anyone outside? Is it all the top six?
Top six, like forwards, you're saying?
So, yeah, DeBrincat, Larkin, Raymond.
There is one top six forward in this group.
Well, now I'm really not going to get it. Moritz Seider.
Moritz Seider is not in this group. He continues to play, I believe, some of the hardest minutes in the NHL and feel the expected goals wrath. Although I'll say his actual goals share is close to 58%, which is outstanding.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, I'll say it then. Andrew Copp.
Andrew Copp is in there, checking
Excellent.
in at 50.3%.
Makes sense. He's the leading goal scorer of the Red Wings, as he should be. That makes a lot of sense to me. What about Vlad Tarasenko?
Tarasenko is not in there. He is at 45%.
What about... Can't be Ben Sherrod, can it?
It cannot.
Okay. Patrick Kane.
Nope.
Who is left? Have I said DeBrincat? No, I haven't.
It is not DeBrincat. There's one top six forward in there.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yep. Lucas Raymond?
It is Raymond.
Okay, and now it's literally anybody else.
And these are not just, they're not just forwards too. So there's D in here.
Okay. Oh, that's Simon Edvinsson.
Nope.
Oli Mata.
Nope.
Eric Gustafsson.
No.
Let's be serious. Let's be a little serious on this show.
There's nobody left.
It's Albert Johansson.
That's number one.
That is
now that one, it probably makes a little more sense than it's going to seem like because he got some sheltered minutes. It's
true.
It's low ice time, 2 games, easy matchups. But he's number one. It's 73%. It went really well with him on the ice so far in those first 2 games. Behind him is Marco Kasper, 57%. 1 game, but that 1 game was quite good. It was exactly what you wanted to see with the underlying stats that obviously complement the eye test and the assist he got. After that, it is Jonathan Berggren, which, I think that one is really interesting because that's a guy who takes a lot of heat, and I've given him some heat, it's gone very well for him to start the year. Now, most of that is fueled offensively, right? Whereas with Kasper and Johansson, they've given like nothing up. It's like barely over an expected goal per 60 minutes, which would be like 1 every 3 games or 4 games with their ice time. Berggren, it's a little higher defensively, which you'd expect, but the offensive generation has been good so far. You could take that one of 2 ways. You could take that to mean he should be higher in the lineup, or you could take it to mean the way they're deploying him right now is getting the most out of him. You could kind of take that either way. And I think there's a reasonable argument. After that, and this is what I really was tickled by, Jeff Petrie, 54%, highest among all non-Johansson defensemen on the team. And he's also only played 2 games, so I think that's relevant. And the other player in that top 7 that's above 50% is Tyler Mott. And that one not too surprising to me. Similar, I think, argument. He hasn't gotten like the very toughest deployments, but a little more underlying offense when Mott's been on the ice than I think people would have expected. So I thought that was a nice little tidbit. Obviously some fan scapegoat favorites in that mix. So I thought that might bring a little bit of clarity.
This is just going to fuel everybody's about, you got to call up everybody. The 3 top guys are all the young guys.
That's right.
I want Danielson up tomorrow. I want Booham up tomorrow. No, but it is a good illustration of just, I think one of the underlying points, and you alluded to it a few times, is this is a good example of how deployment matters. But then it's also more impressive that when Andrew Kopp's just kicking a million pucks into the net, hey, it's still an expected goal or an actual goal in his case this year.
It's right in that sweet spot for him, right? Like he's right obviously on that line of 50. I think whichever side of that line he was on were going to be good because of how hard the matchup he takes were, right? Like we talked about, you just want to keep it level. Don't give up more than you get and try to get a little more than you give up. That's what they've done. 2.58 expected goals for per 60, 2.54 expected goals against per 60. This is all via Evolving Hockey, who I think they have the best expected goals model, or at least the one that I rely on the most. I'm not qualified to critique who has the best, but it's the one that I rely on the most. And so, yeah, that I thought was interesting and, kind of rings true to me to what I've seen so far. I think that 2-goal game for Copp yesterday, I know we can joke about the manner that the goals went into the net. Brad, at the very start, you talked about like Kasper shows up and it's like, whose spot is he taking? Well, Andrew Copp was still in the lineup, but that was Andrew Kopp's third line center job that they put Marco Kasper into. And they put Andrew Copp on the fourth line yesterday, and damned if he doesn't respond with 2 goals. And I think that is relevant. And you saw the big celebration he had after his first goal. That looked like a little bit of catharsis from him. So maybe that is a little bit of fire there. I think he's been pretty good so far.
Well, when you look at the contract, fairly or unfairly, if there is a guy who's going to respond to Marco Kasper in the lineup, you hope it's him above everybody else just because of value per dollar. You need him clicking. So it was good. Now, I'm not willing to give everybody in the bottom 6 carte blanche. There were still some subpar performances in that game from guys who are now on the hot seat with Kasper up, and when Fischer's fully healthy, when Mott's fully healthy, et cetera, et cetera. And Jonathan Berggren wasn't one of them. So it is going to be fascinating going forward, because if you got Copp playing well, if you got Kasper playing well, you got Berggren playing well, there's somebody in that lineup who at the beginning of the season we wouldn't think would have been in trouble is now in trouble.
One last Red Wings topic here, and I don't really think there's a lot of conversation to be had because it's still early in the season, but Alex Lyon came in. He actually came in relief for Talbot in the Rangers game and then was outstanding against the Predators in the win. So the conversation is, okay, Alex Lyon has got going. It's actually his number 1 job. But at the start of the year, we're talking, okay, Talbot's the only one really doing it right now after Husso didn't really survive much beyond the start of the season and got sent down to Grand Rapids. Then that switched again, and the whole 1A, 1B conversation. My take on this is Alex Lyon is getting going. This is the same Alex Lyon from last year. Talbot has had good and bad. I feel like they are going to just try to get both of them going rather than ride the hot hand, because with Lyon last year, you exhausted him. And with Talbot, this isn't a young goalie anymore where you want to be grinding him. Do you guys have the same read, or do you think Lyon is poised to take over the net?
I think because it's so early in the season right now, they're probably, I think we were talking about this off air, but they're going to probably just get everybody some reps, get a feel for it, get them into it. But once we start getting into the depths of the season, you know, your mid-November onwards, yeah, it should be ride the hot hand, because again, Talbot's a good goalie. Lyon's a good goalie. Neither of them is probably a true number 1 going to play 60 games. But if you can get them on a run hot for 3-4 games at a time, you got to run with it. And then obviously when that expected 4th, 5th, 6th game, we'll call it weak performance arises, all right, back to the other guy. And if he has a good game, you ride it. And if he doesn't, you go back to the guy who just came off the hot streak. It's the only formula that's probably sustainable for the Red Wings this year. Because again, I don't think either one of them can carry the load and can be expected to carry the load for the year. But if you're getting really good stretches out of either of them, for the most part, I think you're probably going to end up with overall half decent team goaltending. Not good, just because of the nature of who they are, but half decent.
Yeah, I think ideally here you're going kind of back and forth for a while unless somebody really grabs it and somebody else really flubs, because you want to establish both. You want to avoid the overwork that you saw from Alex Lyon. Not ideal to have the mid-game goalie changes. Obviously, I don't think you want it to go that bad when it goes bad. But I think so far you've had 2 different guys come in and give you a couple of really good performances, whether they're both in starts or whether one's in start and one's in relief. And you're starting to see that those 2 look like your 2 best. Now, Ville Husso had a shutout in Grand Rapids over the weekend. And so I don't think we're done talking about Ville Husso in this mix either here. But right now, I would say certainly looks like there's a little more trust in those 2. Although I think one reason that Husso got sent to GR so fast was just roster gymnastics there. I think there's 4 goalies right now in Grand Rapids between Husso, Cossa, Subban, and Gage Alexander. They're really taking advantage of the no roster limit thing down there.
Let's talk about Grand Rapids and Cossa and the wins they've put together, and especially Cossa had his own big save recently too. It seems like that team is off to the kind of start that we were hoping as Red Wings fans for the organization as a whole, but especially Sebastian Cossa still looks like the Sebastian Cossa has been progressing extremely well going all the way back to last season.
Well, this is exactly what the Red Wings need to see, because Talbot's on a 2-year contract. Husso and Lyon are expiring. There's the prime opportunity prime slot for Cossa to make the jump next year if he can carry the workload in Grand Rapids. And yeah, he's real good. I was laughing watching the highlight of that crazy save he made at the end of the game yesterday. Classic Cossa play where he's a little too aggressive on the initial save, but still makes the good save, but is now a little out of position for the rebound. But because he's so big, so freaky athletic, he still gets back and makes the save on the rebound. So he's progressing probably about as good as we could have hoped.
And I think watching him, I think he looks more controlled on most saves, which is the biggest thing you wanted to see from him. You want to see him going just crisply post to top of the crease to post or post to post and not way over. And that's when you get swimming kind of thing. Like Brad said, it happened on that highlight reel save. And it's obviously great to see that he still has the highlight reel save in him. The thing I would be most encouraged by is he just doesn't seem to need the highlight reel quite as often so far, which is huge. And I think, Grand Rapids has given up 5 goals in 4 games. They're going to give up more goals than that over the course of this season. But it's been a great start down there, and especially for Sebastian Cossa.
It was also really good to see that Amadeus Lombardi had both goals against Manitoba last night too. So there's maybe some found money there as well. So it's good to see him continuing his hot streak from the good camp he had with the Red Wings.
Let's jump over to some NHL news. And I think the one that's starting to kind of flow in is Jeremy Swayman did indeed reset or set a new benchmark in the goalie market. And I don't know that it's one that he was thinking would be the case when he started his whole negotiation process. But Jake Oettinger, who I don't know if you would say he's a comparable goalie to Jeremy Swayman. I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are exactly, but in the same tier, I'd say, if you're being generous towards Swayman here, maybe based on games played. But he got the identical 8 years times $8.25 million contract. What did you make of that? And were you surprised by the number?
Swayman wanted to set the market. 2 goalies have signed for the same AAV ever since he signed it, so it seems to be the going rate. I mean, I like this contract with Oettinger a little bit more than Swayman just because he's played a bit more. You have a better baseline for what his highs are, what his lows are. Most teams, your goalie's your most important player. So if you're getting your most important player, which I would argue for all 3 of these is the case, for under $8.5 million, it's justifiable.
Yeah, I'm sure Boston looks at it and says like, well, this kind of proves their point. If Oettinger was willing to sign for 8.25, then Swayman would have probably been a little bit under that. But, he's got the no tax thing going for him in Texas. He's actually going to take home more of this than Swayman will. And yeah, I mean, these are RFA deals, so they're not really relevant to Shesterkin, but I think it does set a clear bar for what the top RFA goalies are going to make. And now we get to see the really fun thing whenever the Shesterkin deal comes through is he's absolutely going to become the highest paid goalie in the history of the NHL at this point. And now it's a question of how high can he push that, which I think is fascinating because goalies have never played less. Top goalies have never played less in the NHL than they do now. And they're going to make, whether by actual dollars or percent of cap, the most that they've ever made. I'm going to be very fascinated to see by that. Maybe it doesn't quite get there by percent of cap. We'll see on that one. That's really the only question, though.
It's early in the season, and we saw the Edmonton Oilers last year do what seemed to be the unthinkable after being way, way out of it and then taking it all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. But the Nashville Predators don't have Connor McDavid. They don't have Leon Draisaitl, and it seems unlikely that they're going to be able to repeat that if they keep this thing going much longer. So is this 0-5 start for them something to be concerned about?
Yeah, it can't not be concerning for them with the offseason they had, because when you have the offseason they did and you're crowned the quote-unquote offseason champions, kiss of death, there's a magnifying glass on your team at the beginning of the year. And while I don't think any team can truly panic this early in the season, you can be deeply concerned. I mean, we were talking after the Rangers game about we're getting to the threshold of maybe a little more than concern with the Red Wings, and they didn't have a notable offseason. They didn't do anything that would be classified as a roster improvement versus last year, and even we were thinking about it. Now you're the team with Stamkos and Shea and Marchessault, and Saros got the contract extension. The expectations are very, very high. People had them in the same tier as Colorado and Dallas in this division. Not all of us, but
Well, they're still in the category of Colorado right now, so it's not completely wrong.
great point. But yeah, you can't not be deeply concerned if you're invested in Nashville right now, just because of, if nothing else, the optics of it all.
They look old, and they are old. And I think that's one of the risks that happens when you build your team in free agency this way. And, the Red Wings have felt a little bit of this, I think, at times. And even as much as they, long term, I think, are kind of building through the draft, there's been a lot of kind of short term, I don't even know what to call it, kind of like gap filling, but to when those guys develop, that has been done through free agency. And there have been stretches where the Red Wings have, especially on defense, I think, looked their age over the last couple of years. And I definitely see that in a big way right now with Nashville. In the 2 Detroit games, you see their age a little bit. The Red Wings, I don't know if the Red Wings are like the fastest team in the league or anything like that. And they've definitely had the speed advantage over the Predators. Now, Brad and Evan, you guys can kind of correct me if I'm wrong here. Don't we see this though with like older teams a lot, that their starts are especially slow?
As an old person myself, I can tell you it takes a while to get warmed up, and I'm not talking a couple hours.
I refuse to be lumped in the same category as Brad in terms of age, but just in terms of answering your question, I think you see that sort of across almost every team. You see the young guys, like, let's look at Utah, for example. They got a ton of youth. They have been, beyond everyone's expectations to start the season. I think it's fairly natural for some of the older guys in the league to take a little bit longer. And Nashville's had a lot of turnover, right? So it might be trying to figure out chemistry still. For me, I don't know if I'm ultra concerned, because I think they're still better than at least half of the teams in their division. But yeah, the clock's ticking. If we talk about how the Red Wings were 1 point out of the playoffs last year, if something else had changed, like if Nashville misses the playoffs by a few points, like the start of the season is exactly where they're going to look at.
First point, we may not be the same age, but both our ages would be classified as mid-30s.
Incorrect. It's all frame of reference.
And secondly, their division's not crazy, but their division's probably better than people give it credit for. I don't think anybody expects Nashville to be this bad all season, but you know who everybody's more confident probably won't be this bad all season? Colorado. They're going to rise up. Winnipeg, I think, is 5-0. Dallas is elite. You mentioned Utah. They look really good. They are going to be poking around the playoffs this year when it comes down to it. St. Louis doesn't look terrible. Minnesota's always around that number 8, 9, 10 seed. So this could be one of those situations for Nashville. If they don't right it quickly, a lot of teams that are going to be playoff contenders can put some distance between them.
And it's those last two that I'm watching the closest, Minnesota and St. Louis. I think that those first, maybe not with Utah, but Dallas, Winnipeg, Colorado, I think I'm still thinking all those are playoff teams. The most one division can get into the playoffs is 5. Certainly if Utah is ahead of you, and finishes ahead of you, that's, a problem. St. Louis and Minnesota are both 8 points up already on Nashville. And it's like, if you blinked, you missed it. And now you're in, potentially, depending on how each of their next games go, you're talking about a double-digit hole that you have to dig out of before you got your first point. That is a problem.
All right. More NHL news to come next episode as we analyze the way these standings unfold. But for now, we are going to jump into overtime.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to join the Dub Club, the ticket giveaways, the Discord, the bonus episodes, all that and lots more. You allow us to do things like support the Jamie Daniels Foundation through initiatives like Winged Wheel Podcast Night in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. Produce great content like this with Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit joining as a WWP contributor. Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashant Iyer and Sean Shapiro. You also allow us to really kind of continue to try to make the show bigger and better. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Let's take some questions from our patrons, and I want to start here going over to Sweden. Samuel Soderholm asks, in a hypothetical future where ASP makes the jump to North America next year, do you think his shot would translate to the NHL? Could he be our future shooting threat from the left circle? Also, Evan, please do a segment on your love for Diablo in the future.
Yeah, I think it's translatable just because it's such a proven commodity in the NHL. The one-timer from that spot on the power play, it's not just an Ovechkin thing. There's a lot of guys who are elite at it, and it has a high success rate because I forget what the percentage is, but an incredibly high number of goals scored in the NHL are scored with a pass immediately before the goal, which requires the goalie to move. And even if your one-timer isn't OV powerful, if it's accurate, which ASP's is, it is absolutely translatable.
But if he's over there, who's running it? You drafted him to be the guy up top walking the blue line. That the Red Wings don't really have a guy that does that at that level. I guess Seider is the answer, but in theory, you'd have Seider running PP2.
So the advantage that those two specifically would have in that position is because Seider's a right shot. It makes that setup for ASP perfect. We've seen it with Carlson and Ovi in Washington forever because it's a lot easier to make that play on your forehand than your backhand.
But same would be true with sending Pellica up top and DeBrincat or Raymond in the flank as well. Yeah.
It's probably extreme, but right now I think I have a little more faith with Sandin Pellica's one-timer from there than either of them.
I think you drafted Sandin Pellica to be your defenseman that runs the power play from up top and that you have players who you trust to shoot the puck from the flank. That to me is the harder thing to find than the shot. You know, whether his shot translates or not, I think is almost the wrong question. I think it probably will. But I think to me, if he's not, up top, who is up top would be my question.
I think I ultimately agree with you. I just disagree with who's going to take the Sandin Pellica spot. I think you want ASP at the top of the key, and I think he will be. The hope is it's MBN or Danielson over there because Danielson's got a very underrated shot. I don't know if it's good enough to run flank on a power play good, but MBN's definitely is. So you're hoping once he breaks through that's going to be his spot because by the time, we're talking about ASP and, one of Danielson or MBN running a power play, DeBrincat's going to probably be in his 30s. So you're hoping it's one of those guys that really grabs a hold of it.
Next question's from Chimkim Nutgets says, to what extent could defensive system factor into free agent underperformance? Petrie and Hall seem to grow from terrible to tolerable with some time in the system. Now Gustafsson is pilot of the struggle bus. Keep up the great work, boys.
A lot, depending on what team you're coming from, because, I know when we had Newsy on here, he talked about how every team runs some version of a 1-2-2 or a 1-3-1. Defensive zone cycles aren't that different, but they are different enough that if you are used to, play A being your default, now all of a sudden you're trying to learn B and C. In the chaotic nature of hockey, you kind of default back to your instincts and, almost muscle memory. So there would be a transition period, but we're talking weeks, maybe months, not years.
Give Wallman the Heart says, just crunch the numbers and we're ranked 31st in the league in vibes per 60, narrowly edging out Nashville. If you're curious, Utah ranks first. When are we going to have to decide what the season is? Obviously, it's early and overreactions are flying, but if we're going to fall short of last season's mark, I'd rather it be by a lot than a little.
I mean, the old cliche, especially championed by Ken Holland, Thanksgiving. You have a pretty good feel for what every team is by that point to, a fairly high percentage. There's always exceptions to the rule, but if you're talking in likelihood and majorities, you got a pretty good feel for the league at that point.
I don't know that you're ever going to feel until maybe like the trade deadline, like exactly what the season is, though. Like you might be out of it, but you're certainly going to talk yourself into, if you're the Red Wings, pushing for more. I don't think you're going to get some like mass call up of a bunch of young guys and punt the season publicly like that in like December. Like I think you're talking about the trade deadline is when that kind of declaration happens.
Yeah, you're right. That's how the team and the players are going to feel. Everybody else is going to have different opinions.
Fair.
Okay, moving on. Avery Sloppy Second says, are there any 2025 playoff/standing related predictions that any of you made preseason that you feel confident enough completely discarding after one or a bit more than 1 week? So any predictions you're already scared of and want to back out of?
I think I had Nashville in a wild card or in 3 seed in the Central.
I certainly did too.
Yeah.
I had Utah in.
Same.
I think I had Winnipeg as like my last team, which, you know, they're probably not going to be the last team.
Yeah, I think I had 5 Central teams in, which is looking pretty good right now.
No, I think it looks okay so far.
Miss Day says, would you look at that? Kasper allowing for us to slot our team correctly makes everyone play better. Who knew? I can't help but feel that Detroit is saving Cap to take another run at Trouba at the deadline towards the end of the academic year when his wife's residency would likely be ending. So is that Cap accumulation heading in that direction, with the understanding that this is Trouba's last ride with the Rangers and this is going to get resolved by him not being on the team for their cap reasons? Like we said, they have to pay Shesterkin. So is Yzerman gearing up for that?
2 things. One, even with the cap accrual, fitting Trouba in would be tough. Secondly, the Rangers probably are making a run. They're not going to be selling anybody off. And 3, I'm pretty sure the cap accrual is just for flexibility. And if you want to point out one thing specifically, it's probably more for Kane's bonuses to slot them in this year so they don't carry over to next year.
Agreed. That's the number one place that my head has gone when they've done all these paper move stuff, is that if they can accrue enough to pay the 2 to 2.5 or whatever it's going to work out being, however, it depends on if they make the playoffs or not, actually. For Kane's bonuses, that is the number one. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing they could do, is to be able to pay those bonuses this season, not in the future.
Last one here from Man USA Fanman Adams says, what's up with Kane? How can Lalonde unlock him, or is he at the power play merchant level with super sheltered 5-on-5 point of his career? Seems slow, loses board battles and the puck a lot. And to kick off this answer, I am kind of wondering if this isn't just a slower start that you see with guys as they get to the latter stages of their careers. We saw Perron take quite a bit of time last season before he really kind of got his feet under him, if you think he did, I should say. So is this Kane now, or do we think he has a ramp up?
Well, I don't think there's any, in terms of like the battles and stuff, I don't think that's anything you didn't see last year. I think it's just a matter of like we talked about, getting the right kind of line mates next to him to maximize the things that he does at a really, really high level. I thought in the preseason, Kane was one of their best players. And maybe that's because guys hadn't quite turned it on to the battle level enough that some of those things, you know, along the wall or down low don't pop in that way. But it's not like he is going to be a blazing fast player. It's just surround him with guys who can do a lot of the puck transporting for him. He can still do some really slick entries and stuff. He's just probably not going to burn a guy wide to do it. So you put him with the right players is kind of the answer to that. I don't think anyone should be writing off Patrick Kane. I think there's still a very possible like a 70-point season in him, even with what we've seen so far.
Okay, folks, with that, we are going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, this remote episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. We're going to be back with you midweek. We're going to be in studio again, but Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit, Good in the Room version of the episode. Second time we've done it. We hope you are all enjoying this. We know we are. And I'm not even going to say, it's weird to say, Max, thanks for being on the show. You're part of the crew now, so see you in a month, I guess. And again, unless Yzerman does anything to make that come a bit sooner. We are going to thank all of our sponsors of the Winged Wheel Podcast, Labatt Blue, Light, as well as anyone who supports the Winged Wheel Podcast by listening, subscribing on Patreon, etc. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast, go that extra mile, get access to the ticket giveaways, the Discord, the bonus content, all of that and lots more. It really, really, really does help us. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, you can do so by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it may be. Hit that subscribe button and then leave a like or a rating. Those make a big difference for us as well. Tell a friend about the show. To all of our name level supporters on Patreon, we could not do this without you. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zuiza, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Asher Killian, Best James Bond, brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Dub Club, and thank you so much for your support. Carl Brutena Nanaluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Seider Co, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Humphrey, Die Hard. I don't know if I was just tricked into saying something. Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, John Engels, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mr. Kuzi, Putty, brand new name level supporter, R.A., Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, That's What I Appreciate About You, The New Jackson 5 Holes, Wellman's Elite Dancing D, Winged Boogie, Yzerman Stan, General Andy Bohanna, The Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., All Motor No Hands, and Stanislavski, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Chimkim Nutgits, Commander Ben Banner, The Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Parita, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, Dylan Larkin, Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, Huge in Korea, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, Josh Yelchin, Keenan O'Donohue, Casper the Unfriendly Ghost, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Lucas Raitmond, Ophelia, Proud of You Winged Wheel Podcast Boys, Ryan M, Steven, Ryan is a brand new name supporter, That Other Guy, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you so very much. Off to overtime.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.